The Purple Steve has been reborn at last, and he is here to kill us all. So, this is the story. It all begins on a dark, rainy night, long ago, when a Steve, along with an army of villagers, were venturing deep into the caves of the Minecraft world. Their objective? To save a group of captured villagers whom were trapped within the spine-chilling structure of the ancient city. And so that group of brave warriors were marching into the caves, being led by the courageous Steve. And to begin with, their mission was a success, as the Steve, along with his villager army, were able to kill many of the wardens whom were trapping those villagers. And so they were able to free them. But sadly, things wouldn't be great for too long, as very quickly more and more wardens began to burrow their way out of the ground. And so it didn't take too long until the Steve and his soldiers were surrounded. This was it. They were just going to die now. But still, despite facing very likely death, the Steve, the leader of those villagers, just never gave up, as he never stopped fighting, as really deep down he knew that he couldn't let these villagers down. He had to defend them, and very luckily his bravery and courage was paying off, as the Steve was able to create a large enough distraction for most of his soldiers to escape to freedom. And so now all the Steve had to do was just escape himself by running through the same exit as all the others, which he very quickly would try to do, and he would get very close to succeeding when the wardens also began to run over to that exit. And well, they were running fast, very fast in fact, more so than the Steve, and so the evil wardens were going to get over to it before him. This was bad, very bad, and so the villagers had a choice to make. Either they wait for the Steve and hope that the wardens don't make it over to them, or they could block it off and flee. And well, they chose the latter. And so with that, the Steve was now trapped within the ancient city, alone. And so all the wardens began to shift their focus solely onto the Steve, and they began to attack him. For the Steve, this was a hopeless fight. The combined strength of all the wardens was just far greater than he, and so he was just being beaten and battered and became very close to death, with the only thing keeping him barely alive being anger. Anger that he had gained after being betrayed by the very villagers that he was saving. But really, that just wouldn't matter, as just moments later, the Steve would take his final breath. But he wouldn't be dying, no. Instead, he was sent into some sort of strange translucent state, and then disappeared. And so it was on yet another dark, rainy night that a new set of living beings would once again enter that city for the first time in well over 100,000 years. This time, those beings were the Pillagers. Now, they weren't looking to save anyone or save anything. No, instead, they were here on the quest of exploration so that they could further their knowledge on their world. However, before they could begin their search of this strange new structure, they came across a small deposit of a very strange stone. It looked like obsidian, but it wasn't, as it was dripping some sort of purple goo of sorts, and glowed slightly. It was very strange, as the Pillagers had never seen it before, and so they decided to mine it, and keep it in their storage for later. And so, once they'd done that, then they began to explore the ancient city. And well, they were just amazed with everything that they were able to see, as all of this was millions of years old, yet it was so advanced and so big. And so it took them several days to explore the entire ancient city. Well, almost the entirety of the city, as there was still one area that they were left to venture within, that being the monument within the very central point of the city. And so, once they were ready, they made their way over to it and began to explore it. And so it'd be over the next few hours that this group of pillagers would just be amazed with what they could see, as the mason work and the attention to detail within this monument was just fascinating. However, as they were exploring the final parts of this monument, they encountered a slight problem. That being that they had run out of wool, which meant that they were unable to reach the peaks of this monument, and so they were unable to uncover its secrets. And well, that was annoying, as they had gotten this far but were now stuck here. And so the pillagers were just standing there, just confused on what to do, when one of the pillagers had a genius idea, that being to use those strange obsidian blocks that they had found earlier. That could work, they thought, and so the pillagers did just that. However, just as one of the pillagers had built up only a few blocks, the obsidian began to glow, getting brighter and brighter and brighter by the second, until at one moment when it all just disappeared, and along came the Steve, as he had just been awoken. And at the same time, all that glowing obsidian that the pillagers had placed down had fused into him, thus giving him a purple outer casting, which would mean that he was now far more resistant to attacks, but far more noticeably made him purple. And thus, from that moment onwards, this Steve became the Purple Steve. But the very moment that he had materialized, all the pillagers just started to run away in fear, as they had no idea what this Purple Steve was, and whether or not he was a threat. And so their best idea was just to flee. But as they did that, the Purple Steve just stood there, confused, as he had no idea what had just happened, or why it just happened, or even where he was, as the Purple Steve at that moment had forgotten almost everything from his past life, and so he had absolutely no idea what was going on. But he wanted to change that, and thus he began to explore in his attempt to figure out the answers. And well, he, just like the pillagers, would be amazed with everything that he was able to find. Well, that was until he made a mistake, as he accidentally stepped on the Skulk Shrieker. And so from that, a warden was summoned. Now, the Purple Steve had no idea what this warden even was, and so he just stood there, staring at this strange beast, until suddenly, when he had a flashback, he could see himself, but he was dying, as he was being attacked by something. What was it? Wait, he was being attacked by that warden. The vision suddenly ended. Oh no. The Steve realized that warden was clearly a very dangerous beast, and so he just started to run, as he was now scared for his life. And well, that might not have been the smartest idea, as the warden could hear his footsteps and began to chase after him. This was it. He had made it this far, but he was just going to die now. The warden was going to kill him. Well, that's what he thought, until right when the warden was about to hit him, the Steve was able to escape through a tiny crack within the cave, and thus he was saved. But now that he was outside, he was given a whole new set of questions, as he had no idea what this place was, and if the warden would be able to get to him here, and whether or not this new outdoors was safe. But once again, the Purple Steve had none of the answers. But still, he knew that if he stayed here, he never would. And so with that, the Purple Steve decided to explore this strange new world that he was in. And so it'd be over the next few days that the Purple Steve would be able to climb a hill, swim through a river, and jump across the murky swamps. But still, after doing that, he was just so confused, as he hadn't really learned all that much. But, more importantly, he was now exhausted, and he couldn't even run anymore. And so, he just had to walk. And if he didn't find some food soon, then he was going to starve to death. But, very luckily, that would change very soon, as it was on one sunny morning that he was able to cross over a river where he would find it. Civilization. He had just found a village. And so he walked over to that village as fast as he could. And when he arrived within it, all the villagers came running out of their houses. And well, they all just stared at him blankly, as they had no idea what he was. But then, while they were all surrounding him, the Purple Steve decided to walk up to one of them, whom was holding an apple. Yes, that was what the Steve needed. That was food. And so the Steve tried to steal it from that villager. But that villager turned away and didn't allow him to take it. Now, the villagers didn't want to be stolen from, but they did, however, give the Steve an opportunity to earn some food. That was if he just did some work for them. And well, the Purple Steve didn't really have a choice, and so he agreed to it. And thus, with that, the Purple Steve was given an axe and was directed over to a nearby forest and was ordered to cut down the trees. However, the very moment that Purple Steve picked up the axe, it began to glow purple. Now, the villagers did see this, but they thought that it was just a Purple Steve's reflection, and they didn't think any more of it. But still, regardless of that glow, the Purple Steve was able to do his job rather efficiently, as over the next few hours, he worked tirelessly to cut down all of those trees. And once his work was complete, then he was given some food at last. Finally, the Purple Steve felt regenerated again, and he had a burst of energy. And so, once he had finished eating, the villagers came up to him and offered him another job for some more food. And that job was for the Steve to strip all the logs of the trees that he had just mined. Now, this was a very tedious and boring task, but the Purple Steve needed that food, and so he agreed. But little would he know, that decision would forever change his life, as very quickly he learned that he was unable to strip the oak logs with that axe, because as soon as he tried to do that with his magical glowing purple axe, one of his underlying powers would activate, that being his ability to summon giant orbs of crying obsidian. And well, the very moment that this happened, all the villagers came running out of their houses, and they were all shocked to see this. As, how did the Steve just do that? As surely that was impossible for a mere mortal like them. And so, very quickly, only one answer came to their minds, that being that the Purple Steve must be a god. And so with that, all the villagers began to bow down to him and worship him. And so it would be over the next few months that life would change for the Purple Steve quite a lot, as all of a sudden he was just being treated like a godly king, as he was given a shiny crown to wear, was given a massive throne to sit on, and had villager servants ready to serve him at any moment with any request. And so over that time, the villagers came to love the Purple Steve, as they all believed that he was going to do many great things for the villagers, as the villagers did have many prophecies for their future, and the Purple Steve just fulfilled so many of them. So really, for the villagers, he was destined for greatness. And so it would have been rather fair to say that the Purple Steve was living a very good life and was very happy. But still, after a few years of this, the Purple Steve got bored, as he didn't want to spend his entire life here in this village not really doing much. And so it was for that reason that on one sunny afternoon that the Purple Steve decided to leave the village and to now go out and explore the world so that he could learn even more about it and maybe even learn about some new powers that he had hidden within him. And so it would be over the next 100,000 years that the Steve would run across the boring birch forests, over massive mountains, and under giant ravines. And he would be amazed with all that he would see, as everything here in this world was just so beautiful and perfect, and the powers that the Purple Steve had only made doing this easier, as he could scale any mountain with ease just by summoning some of those obsidian orbs, which for some reason he could bounce on, and so he was able to jump very high when on top of them, which allowed the Purple Steve to get even better views of the world. Also, another power that he had learned while exploring the world was the ability to change size, as he had learned that he could grow into a giant whenever he absorbed enough obsidian, and he could also shrink down to a microscopic ant whenever he wanted as well. And so those powers allowed the Steve to not only see the bigger picture within his world, but also the tiniest microscopic details. It was amazing. In fact, it was all going so well that the Steve had been able to master these powers to the point where he didn't even need that purple axe to activate them anymore, as he could just use the powers within his hands. And so the Purple Steve was very powerful, and nothing was going to change that. Well, that's what he thought, until on one dark thundery night when the Purple Steve was just lying in a bed in one of the spruce forests, just happy to be the god and protector of the villagers, when he began to have another vision. He could see himself, and he was with an army of villagers, and they were all bravely fighting a group of those strong and evil wardens. But they were losing, as you can see that many villagers were dead, and many more were either dying or fleeing. But he was still there, not running away like the villagers. He was fighting to defend them, and it was working. But then the vision was cut short and ended. And so the Steve just continued to lay there, happy to know that even in his past life, he and the villagers have always been such great allies. And then he went to sleep. And so it was on that morning after that he left the village and continued his search within the world, all whilst being filled with a feeling of hope and gratefulness for the villagers. But it would be later that day that that feeling would change quite dramatically, as it was on that same day when the sun began to set that the Purple Steve found something very strange, as he had just found a woodland mansion. But this was not just any woodland mansion. No, this was an abandoned woodland mansion. And so the Purple Steve just stood there outside the entrance of this mansion for a few minutes, confused, as he had never seen a mansion like this before. And so, unlike his normal routine, where he typically just ignores the mansion, this time he decided to venture within, And well, that decision would change his life forever. As just a few hours into exploring that mansion, he would receive yet another vision. But this vision was a continuation of that vision that he had from the night that had just passed. And well, what he ended up seeing horrified and disgusted him, as he saw that in that cave, he, the Steve, had never given up fighting. But all the villagers, well, they had. And they had abandoned him and trapped him in that cave and left him to die alone. Then the vision ended, and the Steve was at a loss for words, as he just felt betrayed and lied to, as for his entire life so far, he had believed that the villagers had seen him as an equal, if not a greater being. But from this vision, he could clearly see that that was all a lie, and that the villagers don't really care for the Steve. They only act as if they do, so that they can use him for their own personal gain. And so the Steve just stood there, consumed with the feeling of sadness and betrayal, when out of nowhere an evoker came out of the shadows and casted a spell onto the purple Steve. As the evoker was well aware of the purple Steve's power and was just waiting to strike, and this moment of vulnerability by the purple Steve was the perfect opportunity. And so, it was with that spell that this evoker had just gained partial control over the purple Steve. And so, the evoker forced the Steve to summon a gigantic meteor of obsidian above the most populated villages in the world. As the evoker, just like the Steve at this moment, hated the villagers. And the evoker wanted them extinct. Now, the purple Steve was well aware of what he was being forced to do, and likely could have broken free right then and there and stopped this from happening. But he didn't, as anger at that moment fueled him, and the feeling of betrayal was just too much. And so now he was going to get some revenge. And so, as the meteor began to crash down onto the surface of the world, all the villagers began to panic, and many begged up to the purple Steve to stop this, but he didn't. And so, it was getting closer, and closer, and closer, until, for some reason, the spell suddenly wore off, and the purple Steve realized something. That being that this was all wrong. It didn't matter that he was wronged in the past all that time ago, as the villagers have changed, and him doing this was just proving to the world that he was no better than those evil villagers that had abandoned him. Also, the villagers that were about to suffer this pain were not the same ones that had abandoned him. So really, it wasn't fair on them, as they shouldn't be made to pay the price for the evil actions of their ancestors. But it was too late. The meteor was only a few hundred blocks away now, and it would just be impossible to stop it. Or would it? As the purple Steve knew he had to try, as he owed it to all those innocent villagers just to try and save them. And so with that, the purple Steve grew to the largest giant that he possibly could, and held up his arms, getting ready to catch that meteor. And just a few seconds later, it slammed right into his hands. And so with that, the purple Steve was sent flying backwards all the way back into the ocean. And he was suffering from this, as the meteor was burning him, and the force that pushed him along was causing him so much pain. But still, it worked, as he'd been able to stop that meteor from killing any of the villagers. However, at the same time as that success, the purple Steve had just been killed from it. And so all that was remaining of him was just the giant crater where he and the giant meteor had collided. And this crater at the time was likely the largest one in the entire world, as it descended all the way down to the void. So that was it. That was the final mark that the Purple Steve would make on this world. Well, actually, not quite, as after his death, all of his powers and his soul would actually solidify into 3 glowing obsidian blocks, and those blocks would just hover there, above the crater where he perished. But they wouldn't stay there for too long, as just a few days later, some villagers from the nearby village that was almost crushed would go and investigate this giant crater to see if their beloved Steve had survived the impact. And well, when they realized that he had died here, many villagers began to cry, as these villagers did truly care for him. But then they saw it, those glowing blocks up in the sky. That was very strange, and the villagers wondered, why weren't those blocks destroyed? And so the villagers decided to bridge out to those blocks and mine them. However, the very moment that they did that, they could just sense the presence of the Purple Steve and all of his powers. They just knew that his soul was within those blocks. And so, believing that their godly deity's soul was within those blocks, the villagers made sure to protect them. As if they were truly correct in their belief, then those blocks would likely be the most powerful blocks in the entire overworld. And well, the villagers certainly didn't want anyone else to get that. But even then, after those blocks were secretly hidden away by the villagers, the story does not end. As from that crater, the one that the Purple Steve had created, another being would rise. A being that would come to be the world's worst nightmare. And so, to learn what they did next, then you'll need to watch this video.